I still remember that day as if it happened yesterday. The moment my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled. A single choice can change your life forever. Today, I'm sharing how betrayal forced me to choose myself when no one else would. Before the first chapter unfolds, please subscribe and hit like to help us reach others who might need to hear this. I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Leave your city name in the comments so I can welcome you personally. And now, the story begins. Instead of crying, I smiled because I had learned long ago that some battles are not worth fighting, even when your heart is breaking. It started with a simple message from my son. He said, "Mom, I booked a hotel for you this weekend. It's closer to us, and my wife wants everything perfect." He sounded nervous, almost apologetic. I thought he was just trying to make things easier, to keep the peace. And I agreed, of course. I never refused him anything. The hotel was quiet, too quiet. I unpacked my bag slowly, taking out each item like I wanted to make a memory of it. But as I sat on the edge of the bed, I felt a strange emptiness. My son had done this to please his wife, not me. And I knew, deep in my heart, that this weekend wouldn't be simple. When she arrived, my daughter-in-law's smile didn't reach her eyes. "This is temporary," she said lightly, but I could hear the tension in her voice. She wanted me out of her house, out of their lives, even for a short weekend. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Instead, I watched her carefully. I noticed the way she folded her hands, the slight tilt of her head, the tightness around her mouth. She was scared too, I realized, scared that her life, her home, her perfect little world would change because I existed. And that's when I understood. Sometimes love is quiet, and sometimes love is unwelcome. I chose to sit silently, sipping tea, listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner, pretending everything was fine. But inside, my heart was heavy. Little did I know, that weekend would change everything. It wasn't just about me being in a hotel, it was about secrets, choices, and truths that had been hidden for years, and it would shatter the marriage of the man I had loved all my life, my son. I come from a small, quiet town. My husband passed away many years ago, and my son, David, was my world. I raised him with all the love I could give, even when life was hard. We didn't have much, but we had each other. That bond was everything to me. David was always thoughtful, careful, and kind. Even as a little boy, he would notice the smallest things, a tired look on my face or a frown I tried to hide. I always told him, "You have a big heart, David. Don't let it ever change." I never imagined that same big heart would one day feel torn between two worlds, mine and his wife's. When David met Laura, I was happy at first. She was smart, pretty, and ambitious. He seemed happier than ever. I told myself, maybe finally my son has someone to share his life with, someone to protect and love him. But I also sensed the subtle tension between us from the very beginning. She was polite, always smiling, but there was a coolness in her words, a distance I couldn't quite explain. Over the years, we learned to coexist. I didn't interfere, and she never pushed me away, at least not openly. But there were moments, quiet ones, that spoke louder than words. The way she would check her phone when I walked into the room, the way she whispered to David about boundaries, or the small sighs when I stayed for too long. I tried to ignore them, telling myself that love requires patience. David, in his gentle way, never noticed these small tensions. Or maybe he did, but he didn't want to confront them. He wanted peace in his home, and he wanted everyone to be happy. That was always his way. So when he booked me the hotel that weekend, I understood exactly why he did it. He wanted to make his wife happy. But he didn't ask me if I was okay with it. He didn't consider that being away from his home, even for one night, would make me feel unwanted. I spent the first morning at the hotel watching the sunlight filter through the curtains. Everything looked beautiful on the outside, the clean sheets, the quiet streets, the polished floors, but inside I felt invisible. My thoughts wandered to my son, to the home I had shared with him, and to the moments that were slipping away without anyone noticing. I remembered when David was a boy, how he would sit on my lap while I read him stories. He would fall asleep to my voice, trusting me completely. And now, years later, I realized that the world had changed. He had grown up, made his own life, and created a family of his own. I was proud, yes, but there was a quiet ache, too. The ache of slowly becoming an outsider in the life I had nurtured from the beginning. I tried to fill my day with small distractions. I walked through the hotel lobby, smiled politely at the staff, and watched families gather for breakfast. Every laugh, every shared smile reminded me of what I had once shared with David and what I might have lost. That evening, Laura finally invited me to join them for dinner. It was polite, controlled, and calm, but I noticed the way she arranged the table, the way she placed her husband closer to her, leaving a small space between us. It was subtle, but I felt it, and I understood. She wanted boundaries, she wanted control, and I was the unknown variable, the part of the past that didn't belong in their present. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, and to remember that my son loved me. That was enough. But inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that this weekend would reveal more than just polite tensions. There was something in Laura's eyes, a quiet resistance, a warning that things might change in ways I could not yet understand. And so I spent the night in that hotel, sitting by the window, listening to the soft hum of the city outside, and thinking about how much love can stretch and sometimes break when hearts are caught between duty, desire, and fear. The next morning, I woke to the soft sound of rain tapping against the window. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, like the calm before a storm. I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat quietly, watching the gray sky. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, this weekend could be simple. Polite conversations, gentle laughter, the kind of moments that make memories without leaving scars. But I knew better now. Laura had a way of controlling the space around her, the atmosphere, even the smallest details. At breakfast, she handed me a plate, her smile tight and rehearsed. "I hope you like eggs this way," she said. "They're perfect," I replied softly, not wanting to create tension. I wanted to be easy, to be calm. But even as I spoke, I noticed the glance she gave David, a brief flicker of warning in her eyes. Something unspoken passed between them, and I could feel it. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to exist in their carefully ordered life. After breakfast, we decided to take a walk in the nearby park. I thought the fresh air might ease the tension, give us a chance to talk calmly. But even there, Laura's control was clear. She guided the conversation, asked questions, but never gave room for honesty. She wanted to frame the weekend her way, and I was supposed to follow. I tried to speak gently, to share stories about David when he was young, hoping to find a bridge between us. "Do you remember when he used to climb the old oak tree in our yard?" I said, smiling softly. Laura nodded politely, her eyes scanning the park. "Yes," she said, but there was no warmth. She didn't laugh, she didn't engage. It was a performance of attention, not genuine interest. David, ever the peacemaker, smiled at both of us. "Mom, maybe you could tell her about the time I tried to make breakfast for the whole family?" he suggested, trying to lighten the mood. I glanced at Laura, expecting a smile, but she just nodded again. "Sure," she said, but her tone was flat, almost dismissive. The small warmth of connection I had hoped for evaporated. By the afternoon, the tension had grown thicker. I tried to read in a quiet corner of the hotel lounge, but every laugh, every glance reminded me of my position, the observer, the outsider. I noticed small things that seemed harmless but carried weight. Laura rearranging chairs when I approached, subtly correcting David's words when he mentioned our family, checking her phone during stories I shared. It wasn't rude, not overtly, but it was clear she wanted control and I was not part of it. That evening, back in the hotel room, David approached me quietly. "Mom, don't take it personally," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "She just wants things her way." "I understand, David," I replied softly. "I know she wants to protect her home, but sometimes protecting a home means pushing away the people who care the most." He sighed, a mixture of frustration and helplessness. "I know. I hate that it has to be like this. I just wanted everyone to be comfortable, to get along." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain. I could feel his pain, the tension of being caught between two worlds, his wife's expectations and his mother's quiet presence. The next morning, things escalated without a single loud word. Laura had organized the hotel room perfectly, towels folded, toiletries arranged, even a small welcome note for me. It seemed thoughtful at first, but when I picked up the note, I noticed the wording: "We hope you enjoy your stay and respect our space." I held the paper in my hands, reading it again. Respect our space. It was polite, yes, but the meaning was clear. I wasn't welcome here, truly. My son had created a temporary space for me, but it was a carefully controlled environment, designed more for his wife than for me. Later, during lunch, a conversation about family history turned tense. I shared a memory about David's father, about the little lessons I'd tried to teach him. Laura interjected softly but firmly, "I think it's important for David to focus on the present, not the past." I looked at her, keeping my voice gentle. The past shapes who we are. Without it, we forget the people who helped us become who we are today. David tried to mediate. "Laura, I think Mom is just sharing a story. It's not about dwelling on the past." Laura gave a tight smile. "I understand. I think we need to focus on our life now." I nodded slowly. The words were simple, but the meaning hit hard. She didn't want me influencing their present. She didn't want the past to matter. And in that moment, I realized this weekend wasn't about family bonding. It was about control, boundaries, and carefully managed appearances. The tension built slowly over small incidents. Laura insisting on what we ate, where we sat, how long we stayed in each place. Even the simplest gestures carried unspoken rules. I learned quickly that anything I did, anything I said, could be misinterpreted. My kindness was sometimes seen as interference. My care for David was sometimes seen as a threat. By the third day, the quiet conflict had become almost tangible. I noticed the subtle changes in David, the way he would hesitate before speaking, the way he tried to measure every word so as not to upset his wife. His gentle heart was strained under the weight of unspoken rules, and I couldn't help but feel a small, quiet sorrow. My son, my boy, was struggling to protect everyone and had no room to protect himself. That evening, as we sat in the hotel room, the rain tapping steadily against the glass, a small argument started over something trivial, the television channel. Laura wanted a certain program, David suggested a different one. I stayed quiet, watching, but even without speaking, my presence seemed to amplify the tension. Finally, David spoke softly. "Let's just watch what she wants, Mom. It's easier." I nodded, keeping my voice low. "Of course, David, whatever makes you both comfortable." Laura gave a small, relieved smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. And in that silence, I understood something I hadn't faced before. This weekend wasn't just about a weekend in a hotel. It was about invisible lines,
unspoken rules and the slow erosion of family bonds when control and fear take the lead. That night, I lay awake, listening to the rain, thinking about love and boundaries, about how even the closest hearts can feel miles apart when misunderstandings grow. I realized that the coming days would not be easy. Something was brewing beneath the polite smiles and quiet gestures, something that neither David nor I could fully anticipate. And I had a feeling, a quiet, sinking feeling, that the weekend would reveal more than just tension. It would reveal secrets, choices, and decisions that could not be undone.
By the fourth day of the weekend, the hotel had become a strange, tense space. Polite, quiet, but heavy with unspoken rules. I had learned to move carefully, to smile when necessary, and to keep my thoughts to myself. But even in silence, I could feel the weight of what was coming. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure I could stop it. That morning, David suggested a walk by the nearby lake. "Mom, come with us," he said gently. I thought the fresh air might help everyone relax. I agreed, though my heart felt tight. Laura had a faint, polite smile, but there was a distance in her eyes I could not ignore. As we walked, the world seemed calm. The mist rising off the lake, the ducks swimming slowly, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. But beneath that calm, a storm was waiting. Laura spoke first. "David, can we talk?" Her voice was soft but firm. I stopped walking, sensing the tension. David looked at me briefly, his eyes apologetic. "I'll be right back," he said. He stepped a few paces forward to talk privately. I stayed behind, pretending to watch the water, but I could hear them. Their voices were low, careful, yet I could feel the undercurrent of frustration and fear. "I can't do this anymore," Laura said, her words sharp despite her soft tone. "Every time she's around, it's like I'm invisible, or worse, like my home isn't mine. David, I need you to see that. I need you to choose." I froze. My heart thudded painfully. Choose? What did she mean? I strained to hear, but I could not catch the rest. David's voice was calm, hesitant. "Laura, I love Mom. She's my mother. You know that. I never wanted you to feel this way, but she's my family too. I can't just push her away." "Then something has to give," she whispered, almost to herself. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. I can't live in a house where I feel like a guest in my own life." I stepped closer, quietly. I didn't want to startle them, but I wanted to hear the rest. Laura saw me and stiffened. Her smile disappeared entirely. "Mom," David said quickly, "we're just talking. Don't take it the wrong way." I nodded, but my heart was pounding. There was no misunderstanding here. Something was breaking, slowly, quietly, like glass under pressure. Later that afternoon, in the hotel room, the breaking point arrived. Laura had suggested we go out for lunch at a small restaurant nearby. I agreed, keeping my voice calm, my expressions neutral. But as we walked, I noticed subtle signs. The way Laura moved slightly ahead, the way she glanced back at me, the faint tension in David's shoulders. At the restaurant, the conversation seemed normal at first. We ordered food, exchanged polite words, but then Laura said something that made my stomach drop. "David," she said, gently but firmly, "I've been thinking, maybe it would be better if your mother stayed elsewhere permanently. It would make things simpler." The words hit me like a cold wind. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to tell her she couldn't do that, but I didn't. I simply sipped my water, my hands trembling slightly. David's face paled. "Laura, that's not fair. You know that's not what I want."
"I'm sorry," she said, her eyes tearing slightly. I can't live like this anymore. I need my home, my space, my life without constant tension." I realized in that moment that the hotel, the polite gestures, the carefully arranged weekend, it had all been a facade, a way to test boundaries, to control space, to push me away. And now the quiet truth was out in the open. I was being rejected, not with anger or shouting, but with soft words, careful reasoning, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. David's shoulders slumped. He looked at me, guilt and helplessness in his eyes. "Mom, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," I whispered, my voice calm despite the ache in my chest. "I understand." We returned to the hotel in silence. The car ride was quiet, except for the soft hum of the engine. I watched the rain streak across the window, my mind heavy with memories and regrets. I thought of all the years I had loved my son, all the times I had tried to protect him, guide him, and support him. And now I realized that sometimes love is not enough to hold a family together. That night, the breaking point deepened. Laura wanted to go out for a walk along the riverfront, but I sensed tension. I quietly declined, saying I needed rest. She didn't argue, but her glance was sharp, almost accusing. David left the room with her, and I was alone. Alone, I reflected on the choices that had led us here. I remembered the small tensions, the polite instructions, the subtle signs of control that had been growing for years. I realized that this wasn't just a single weekend issue. It was accumulation of unspoken rules, misunderstandings, and the fear of losing control. Later, when they returned, David sat beside me. "Mom," he said softly, "I feel like I've failed. I never wanted this. I thought maybe a weekend would make things easier, but it's only made things worse." I reached for his hand. "David, you haven't failed. You're caught in the middle of love and fear. Sometimes people make choices based on fear, not love. That doesn't make you wrong." He looked at me, his eyes glistening. "But it's my marriage. I don't want it to break." I held his gaze softly. "Neither do I, but sometimes the truth needs to be faced, and sometimes love means letting go, or standing quietly, even when it hurts." The rest of the evening passed in silence. No one spoke much. The rain continued to fall outside, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo the quiet tension in our hearts. I realized that the weekend, meant to please his wife, had revealed a deeper truth, that control and fear could quietly erode even the strongest bonds. By the end of the night, I understood that the turning point had already arrived. It wasn't marked by anger or shouting or dramatic gestures. It was marked by quiet decisions, soft words, and the recognition that some relationships must be tested before they can heal or break. I sat by the window watching the rain, thinking of the past, of my husband, of the small moments with David, and of the choice he now faced. A choice between loyalty to his mother, the woman who had raised him, and loyalty to the life he had built with Laura. I didn't know what would happen next. I only knew that love, even when gentle and patient, could not always prevent heartbreak, and sometimes the hardest turning points in life are silent, felt in the chest, seen in the eyes, and carried in the quiet spaces between words. And that night, as I closed my eyes, I realized something else. This weekend had already changed everything. It had revealed truths that could no longer be ignored, and had set in motion events that would test every bond, every choice, and every heart in our small family.
The next morning, I woke to the soft gray light of a cloudy day.
The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, and for a moment I felt a quiet calm. But I also knew that the events of the previous day had left a mark on all of us, a mark that would take time to understand, if not heal. David was the first to wake. He came quietly to my room and knocked softly. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded, and he sat beside me on the bed. His shoulders were heavy with the weight of the weekend, the tension between love and duty. "I feel lost," he admitted. "I don't know how to make things right with Laura without hurting you, and I don't want to hurt either of you." I reached for his hand and held it gently. "David, sometimes we cannot control how others feel or what they decide. What we can control is how we respond and how we hold ourselves in love and compassion." He looked at me, eyes glistening. "But what if she never accepts, never understands?" I smiled softly, though it hurt. "Then you keep living your truth. You stay kind, you stay honest, and you trust that love in its own way will guide you." Later, Laura joined us in the room. Her smile was hesitant, but her eyes held a shadow of fear and guilt. I realized then that she too was trapped by expectations, by fear of imperfection, by the desire to control what she could not fully control. I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. I wanted things to be simple." I nodded slowly. Sometimes simplicity comes at a cost, and sometimes we have to face difficult truths to grow closer rather than apart. David reached out, placing a hand on Laura's shoulder. "Mom, I think we all made mistakes this weekend, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we needed to see how fragile things can be and how important they are to protect." We sat quietly for a long while, the room filled with soft light and the faint hum of the city outside. The tension, while still present, had softened. No words could undo the misunderstandings, but acknowledgement had begun the healing process. That evening we returned to their home. I carried a quiet understanding in my heart that relationships are fragile, that love is not always enough to protect us from fear or misunderstanding, and that family bonds sometimes need patience, honesty, and courage to survive. Laura, David, and I spent the evening talking gently, sharing our thoughts and fears. We didn't solve everything. Some distance remained, but we began to understand each other better, to see the humanity, the love, and the fear that had guided our actions. I realized something important that night. Love does not always demand control. It asks for presence, patience, and empathy. And while mistakes can hurt, they also offer lessons that, if acknowledged, can strengthen bonds instead of breaking them. I watched David carefully, noting the subtle tension in his shoulders begin to ease. He smiled at me briefly, softly. "Mom, I think we can get through this," he said. I smiled back. "Yes, David, we will. It will take time, but love has a way of finding its balance if we let it." Laura, too, softened. She didn't say much, but her gestures were gentle, and the tension in her face began to ease. I understood that she needed time, just as we all did, to adjust, to trust, and to see that love can coexist with boundaries. That night, as I lay in my bed, I reflected on the weekend. It had been difficult, painful, and filled with quiet heartbreak, but it had also been necessary. We had faced truths, confronted fears, and begun to understand the fragile, delicate dance of family, love, and respect. I thought about my son, my David, and the woman he loved. I thought about myself and the role I would continue to play in their lives. I realized that love is not always about being present in every moment. Sometimes it's about stepping back, listening, and allowing space for others to grow and find their own balance. By the end of the night, a sense of peace settled over me. It was soft, quiet, and tentative, but it was there.
I knew the weekend had changed things. It had tested hearts, exposed fears, and challenged the bonds we held. But it had also reminded us that love, even when complicated, remains the strongest thread that ties a family together. I understood finally that the turning point was not about rejection or anger, it was about truth, the painful, undeniable truth that sometimes life forces us to face what we cannot ignore, and in facing it, we find strength, patience, and the first steps towards healing.
The days after that weekend were quiet, but not empty. There was a gentle change in the air, like the soft shift of seasons. David and Laura began to understand each other in ways they hadn't before. They still had their differences, of course, every couple does, but the tension had eased, replaced with small acts of patience and consideration. I returned to their home a few days later, not as a visitor, but as part of the family again. We shared meals with laughter that felt real, conversations that felt honest, and moments that reminded us why we cared for each other in the first place. It wasn't perfect, nothing in life ever is, but it was real, and it was enough. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, David held my hand gently. "Mom, thank you for understanding," he said softly. "I know it hasn't been easy for anyone." I smiled, squeezing his hand. Love is never easy, David. It takes patience, it takes listening, and sometimes it takes stepping back, even when it hurts, to let others find their way. Laura, sitting nearby, worked at me with something like respect in her eyes. She didn't say much, but her small smile spoke volumes. I realized then that relationships, even complicated ones, can grow stronger when hearts are honest and when we acknowledge each other's feelings with care. That night, I reflected on the weekend and the events that had shaken us all. I realized that life often presents challenges in ways we cannot predict. Sometimes the people we love most will be caught in conflicts, misunderstandings, or fears that seem bigger than life itself. And sometimes the only way to preserve those relationships is through quiet strength, patience, and empathy. I thought about my son, my David, and the choices he faced. I thought about Laura, her fears, and her need for control. I thought about myself and the quiet resilience that had carried me through years of love, loss, and sacrifice. And I understood something important. Family is not always about closeness in every moment. Sometimes family is about showing up, staying gentle, and allowing love to work quietly, even in difficult spaces. The lesson I carry now is simple but profound. Love is not about control. It is not about perfection. It is about understanding, compassion, and patience. It is about giving space to others while holding on to what is important, the bond that ties hearts together. As I prepared to leave that weekend behind, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, the tension had eased, and though life would continue to bring challenges, I knew that love, patient, quiet, and understanding, could withstand them. I watched David and Laura share a small smile across the room. It was tentative, yet hopeful. And I realized that even when mistakes are made, even when hearts are tested, families can find their way back to each other. And so I carry this story with me, not as a tale of conflict, but as a reminder. Sometimes the hardest moments reveal the deepest truths. Sometimes patience and understanding are more powerful than words or actions, and sometimes love, even when complicated, is strong enough to endure, heal, and bring warmth to the hearts of those who truly care. As I prepared to leave that weekend behind, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, the tension had eased, and though life would continue to bring challenges, I knew that love, patient, quiet, and understanding, could withstand them. I watched David and Laura share a small smile across the room. It was tentative, yet hopeful, and I realized that even when mistakes are made, even when hearts are tested, families can find their way back to each other. And so I carry this story with me, not as a tale of conflict, but as a reminder. Sometimes the hardest moments reveal the deepest truths. Sometimes patience and understanding are more powerful than words or actions, and sometimes love, even when complicated, is strong enough to endure, heal, and bring warmth to the hearts of those who truly care.